The Torah tells us that when there will be some kind of an uncertainty, some safek with regards to some law, the main Beit Din, what later would be called Sanhedrin, from the Greek word, this main judicial body, the Beit Din Gadol, will decide, and we have to follow them no matter what they say. We should not turn to the right or to the left, yamin or small, right? The Torah says you shouldn't digress from their decision to the right or to the left. So it's a very well-known drash that the commentators here bring, Rashi, Ramban, that it's taken from Sifrei, a halachic midrash to Sefer Dvarim, also to Sefer Bamidbar. Sifrei is the halachic midrash to two books, so that's why it's called Sifrei in plural. Sifrei is a halachic midrash to the book of Vayikra, and Sifrei is halachic midrash to Bamidbar and Dvarim. So in Sifrei here, the midrash says that we have to follow the psak of the sages, even if they say what we might think is they're basically mistaken so clearly that they say on the right that it's left and on the left that it's right. We still have to follow them. Our opinion doesn't count. Whatever they said is correct, and we think that they may be totally wrong, that they said everything directly the opposite of the truth. They called right, left, and left, right. Still, it doesn't matter. We have to follow them. However, in Jerusalem Talmud, in Yerushalmi, they used to call it, by the way, in some sources, until recently, Palestinian Talmud. Right? Until recently, it was very clear that the word Palestine associated with the place where the Jews lived. So, whenever we hear today the word Palestinian, it has certain new associations, but there was no Palestinian people until very, very recently. They were just regular Arabs that came, most of them came within the last 100 or slightly more years to the land of Israel. Some of them came earlier, but in general, the time when the Arabs conquered this is certainly after Islam. So at the earliest, even the earliest Arab settlers to the land of Israel were at most 2,000 years after the Jews already lived there. But the vast majority of people, so-called Palestinians, are just Arabs who came from Syria, from Egypt. A lot of them don't have last names. You know, this Mohammed Def that was eliminated recently, one of the leaders of Hamas. His last name used to be, before he changed it, was Mitzri, basically. It was Egyptian. So they even had last names that were clearly coming from other lands. And it was only when the infrastructure started growing, after the Jews started coming back, they were hiring some Arabs, and then during the times when the British got the mandate on Palestine, they used to limit the Jewish immigration, but a lot of Arabs were able to come, as many as they wanted. And that's how a lot of the so-called Palestinians are just regular Arabs that came within the last 100 years or so, or maybe a little bit more. But whatever the case may be, the Jews used to be called Palestinians. And that's what was in the passport. If you took a Jewish passport in the times of the British, it would say Palestinian in it. The Arabs were just Arabs, but the Jews were the Palestinians. Whatever the case may be, the Palestinian Talmud, of course, is the Jerusalem Talmud, or Talmud of Eretz Israel, as some sources call it. That's probably the most proper name of it, because to call it Jerusalem Talmud would imply that it was made in Jerusalem, but it wasn't. It was made in the north, in Galilee. But since generally, by that time, the Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, and very few Jews were able to live there. So it was really in the north, but I guess because of the love of Jerusalem, because the Torah comes from Zion, that's why they sometimes call it Yerushalmi, the Talmud of Jerusalem. But the more proper name would be the Talmud of the land of Israel, or in English, Palestinian Talmud, which, like I said, meant the Talmud of the land of Israel. It was the same thing. It's just the Romans called this province Palestine, but it wasn't because the Arabs, who later called themselves Palestinians, lived there. There were no Arabs there in the times of Romans. Anyway, so in the Palestinian Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud, it says a very interesting drasha, that you have to follow the sages when they say on the right that it's right and on the left that it's left. Seems like exactly the opposite. You only have to follow them when they say correctly, not when they say it's wrong. So this is a very old question. A lot of commentators try to deal with it. They don't say that there is a contradiction, that there are two different opinions here. They say that both are true, and Rambam in fact brings both drashes. And the difference is, there are a lot of different explanations, but I will give you one example of an approach which I like particularly, and that's the approach of Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. So he says that, indeed, let's say you're a great sage also. You're a big Talmudic sage. And you heard that the main Jewish court, the Supreme Court so-called, right, the Sanhedrin, decided that something is permitted, per se. Let's say they said that you're allowed to carry on Shabbat in a certain area, that the Eruv there is kosher Eruv. Or they said that certain types of fats, animal fats, are permitted. They're not chelev that the Torah defines. And you disagree with it. So says Ramban, you're not allowed to follow them. You could only follow them when they say on the right, on the left, like the Jerusalem Talmud, the Palestinian Talmud tells us. You have to follow the Chazal only, you have to follow the greatest sages only when they say correctly. You cannot eat forbidden fats just because they paskin if you think that they're wrong. However, all of that applies until you present your arguments to them. Once you come before the great Sanhedrin and you tell them all your arguments, why this fat is forbidden, why this eruv is not kosher, and they still persist and hold on to their opinion, then you could no longer argue with them, and you have to now follow them. It's forbidden for you to follow your own opinion, and certainly to paskin like your own opinion, since you already told them your arguments, and they still rejected them, and they still, the majority of the Jewish sages still hold the original psak. Then you could no longer follow your own opinion. It's more important for the Torah that it will be uniform than that it will be correct, if there is such a thing. I mean, a lot of things are so vague that there is no one correct way. In some cases, it's Elu V'Elu Divrei Elokim Chaim, that both may be right to a certain extent. But whatever the case may be, even if a real mistake happens, as the Sefer HaChinuch says, it's better that everybody follows the same Torah, even though we could end up following a mistaken opinion, then if everybody will follow their own Torah. There will be many different Torahs, and every sage will decide whatever he thinks is right. So in this case, we take the risk. Yes, the Sanhedrin might be wrong, you might be right, but you still have to follow it. Once you presented your arguments and they hold on to their opinion, you follow them. And if it turns out that they were wrong, they themselves will change their opinion. A later Sanhedrin can change an opinion sometimes of the previous Sanhedrin. That could happen. But at this point in time, the Sanhedrin of your time holds a certain opinion, you have to follow them. And specifically, of course, the drash of Sifrei is talking about the people who actually went to that Sanhedrin and asked them. Right? The whole parsha, this whole passage in the Torah, in our parsha, is talking about a person who had, or a group of people, or the sages in some city who had a safek, they weren't sure about some law, and they came to the main Supreme Court, and they presented their arguments, and the Supreme Court paskined something. So whoever heard the psak from them, whatever arguments they had, they would have presented to them. And if the Supreme Court held on to their opinion, you have to follow what they say, even if what they said to you appears as if they're calling right left and left right. One possible situation could be when there was a dispute between two different sages in a certain city. Each one was 100% sure that he's right. They came before the Sanhedrin, before the Supreme Court. Each one presented his arguments. The Supreme Court chose one of the two sides. They said that you're right, the other one is wrong. He thinks that they're obviously mistaken. He still has to follow what they said. Once he presented his arguments to them, he has to follow what they said, and that's when the drash of Sifrei applies. And if you like this video, please press like and please subscribe to our channel.